Sit back in your seats, relax, and enjoy a tale or two of tragedy, failure, and incompetence by yours truly. Now, I've gone on record that I've been in some terrible games. Absolutely terrible. Now, yeah, I can be a little bit judgmental in that regard. Not usually. Usually, I try and end up giving some people the same that I try and give myself. Mostly on the fact that I am probably my harshest critic, and I think every GM, every storyteller, every flame tender, whatever you want to use, well, is the same. So I figured to get it out on the table. Maybe, just maybe, God, just maybe, you might be able to end up learning from some of my mistakes way before you end up doing it. I mean, an intelligent man learns from his mistakes. A wise man learns from others. So hopefully, in this little bit where I exchange a few tales of my, shall we say, less successful games and experiments, and learn from them. So let me take you back to the release of Dungeons and Dragons 3.0. Let's get rid of that ghost on the camera, first and foremost. So, I was in high school, and this was really when I first started role playing. And when I said role playing, I mean roll as in the roll of the dice. Much like many other people, I ended up coming into RPGs with an understanding that this was a video game you played over tabletop with dice. You know, I would try and end up doing things, probably get me killed, got a little bit frustrating, but that's talking about as a player. As a storyteller, the first game I ended up running. Oh, this was a fucking nightmare. Okay. So the first thing you need to end up understanding is that I had no setup for plot, no setup for politics or understanding of my own world. All I knew is that I've been playing a lot of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and was inspired by that by basically throwing around this big indestructible golem. And what this golem effectively was my beat stick when I wanted the players to be running away. Unfortunately, that trick got really fucking old really fucking quick, and it just kind of disheartened the players. You know, I was so excited to end up being able to run a game. I was starting to run it for my own entertainment in the way that drives players out. Wasn't quite a meat grinder. They would always escape, but the reality was uh, you could see it. Like, we had a lunchtime to play. We had 1 hour every day to sit in a private room and play. And for an hour, I would torment these players. I tried to come up with ideas for they were hallucinating, seeing each other as orcs in hopes to make them attack one another. But, you know, they meted the hell out of that. And I was like, okay, how can I trick a bunch of players to do this? Now, this should tell you the kind of game we were running. Because everybody saw through it, including the Intelligence 9 Barbarian. You know, the dimwit of the group. Which ended up make you, and we're talking about the character, of course, not the player. Player was a average intelligence individual. I didn't fully get along with him, but you know, give credit where credit is due. But one thing we didn't have a lot of in those days was really role playing, making a character, you know, making a personality and making it entertaining for everybody else, for us to be playing with them. That's something you got to end up bringing in. And my whole bit was to end up basically just playing as this nemesis character to bully around the head, bully around the players. Don't do this, okay? One, as the GM, you are not there for your own personal power trip. You're really not. You're wasting everybody else's time. You're wasting your own time. And you are, especially at that point in life, if you're still new to RPGs, like you have not played these since you were, 12 or what have you, you can do some really large amount of damage in the hobby. Now, thankfully, to my knowledge, 3 out of those 5 players are still playing in their own games, Call of Cthulhu, Dungeons and Dragons. One of them has even gone over to try and end up making his own game system. I applaud him for it. I just really wish that I could end up bringing that game back, if only on the fact that I'd love to end up trying to find some way to take that old mistake and build it up into a really good story. There is something about that thing that follows you and is incessant and is stalking you, but that you need to build that as an experience, not the GM doesn't know what he's doing, so we know the golem's coming in 3, 2, there it is. Don't need that. Now, that's not to say that all my mistakes are long in the past. Let me give you an example. In the current game I'm running, I've made a horrible mistake. And that was putting players in situations they're not ready for. Maybe their character is, but they are not. And this comes down to an explanation in playing, well, you guessed it, right? Vampire 20th anniversary collection, or edition. In which case, to interject them into the politics as neonates, I gave them what feels to be an impossible task. And really, it's a long-term task. And when I say long-term, this should take like 100 years to execute. But I set it in the present day. Now, I'm not a person who can read the future, though it might be interesting to try and end up making a game that actually eventually goes into the future, or what you think the future is going to be like. Could be interesting. Vampires in space. Jot that one down. Now, to put this into perspective, in the setting I run, there's rival princes, effectively. One was the old prince that was ejected and is currently a herald to the current prince. She keeps him around as a warning, as it were, for anybody else who believes that she is incapable of running the city. And if anybody wants to try and push against her rule, to ask what happened to the former prince. Every night he lives in shame because her orders are being said by his mouth. He got a little bit bitter than that and is currently making, through the party, an attempt to bring about a new order. What he feels is the true Camarilla. Now, this unto itself wouldn't be a bad plot device. Here's where I screwed up. I ended up giving the Nosferatu the chance at raising up to a hound status, while the other one has domain that is far larger than any one neonate would ever have the power to end up holding. Now, the issue that I'm primarily running into, in my experience, is that they don't have the experience to ever really consider the details I can go into. If you really stop and think about it, if you're a neonate, right, you have this one small piece of the city. It could be an apartment building. It could be an apartment. It could be the entire city block. Might even be a few city blocks. It's a fairly sizable bit, and maybe well, how do you protect it? These are your grounds. These are this, for lack of a better term, this is your domain. Well, I gave her one much bigger than that because it's a particular domain. The reason I ended up doing this is because of the background machinations that I'm currently weaving, which I'm not going to get into because the game's still running. But this was a mistake. I view this as a heavy mistake. And here's why. The character currently going for a Hound. This is his first real attempt with a more political-minded RPG. While he has played Vampire before, he has not played one that actually involved politics. In fact, the stuff he ran into was more akin to a Sabbat game than any Camarilla game. So he never really got to end up learning politics or anything like that. And suddenly now he finds himself in the middle of a political mess, but he doesn't understand the contexts. And he's still trying to figure things out, usually by asking another NPC, which some NPCs are designed to support him and help him along because they gain a huge benefit if he succeeds. Unfortunately, I ramped it up way too quick, personally. And the same goes for domain, right? Just setting up one of the things I like to run in the campaign that I do, and I've been running the same campaign on and off for probably 10 years now. VTR and VTM. I have conversions for both, depending what you want to run. Really, what's more important is the characters, not the system. Really, if you have a good, even a relatively okay system, but really strong characters, people love it. If you have the best system on the world, but everything falls flat, it doesn't work too well. Well, the thing was, I escalated way too quickly. I might actually go over at some point what I feel is probably your bare bones Vampire the Masquerade experience. And just a few plots to end up going through, maybe in What If series. But because I gave them too much, they don't know how to handle it in character more than anything. I know one of my players is really good. The problem is that the character they're playing is supposed to be naive. So they can't bring out all their tricks and twists to make things work. It's kind of sad in that regard because I've kind of put them in a no-win situation that I am trying to find ways to weave the plot to keep it interesting. Now they're having a blast nevertheless. They enjoy playing it, but like I said, STs, GMs, flame tenders, we're all our harshest critics. We're our own harshest critics, I should say. So you keep thinking, what could I have done better? What could I have done better? Lesson to learn from this: start small, build up slowly. All right, build up slowly, and things will just start. The complications will ramp up on their own if you take your time. But you need to make sure that the characters are starting. If you make a level 1 character and tell me that he's been in the army for 17 years, things don't stack up when you're playing Pathfinder. The same is true for Vampire. The same is true for just about everything. So take the time to let things establish slowly. Let them get familiar. Let them get comfortable. Because once they're comfortable, that's when you can start switching things on them. That's where you can start pressuring them. But if they are constantly unsure of what's going on, where everything's going, what's the shift, it doesn't matter how big your plot point is. things could be blowing up in front of them and they would have no idea what the heck's going on because they don't have any context. Now, that would be great if it was a mystery, but that's not the case right now. Last story. One of the, well, I should say my D&D group, my Pathfinder group, whatever. It doesn't really matter to me. I run multiple systems, but I run effectively the same scenario. I shouldn't say scenario. It's not like it's a fixed plot or anything. What it is my worlds. This is something I don't view this as a mistake. This I find actually fairly interesting because I haven't seen too many GMs that do this. I have in each game I play my own setting. I know that setting. I have books written on that setting. In fact, if I were to end up closing this up, right here is a sketchbook. And in this sketchbook is all manners of drawings and notes. Well, not there, but yeah. Let's see. Sorry, light's too bright. But maybe, no. Anyway, suffice it to say, there is a lot of details, thought webs, character sheets, designs, settings, scenarios, and all that I've been running. And this is one of quite a few books I have on a single setting. I always try and end up keeping notes. I always try and end up making sure that my settings are consistently the same setting, always impacted by what the previous game was. So reality is if you come into one of my games, some of the stuff that might be a plot thread right now might be a direct result of who came into the game previously. Anyway, going back on topic, it was a bit of a segue. When I ended up doing my D&D group, I was so invested. And this was a game I ran probably 4 years back. Yeah, 4 or 5 years back. I was so invested in the world I created and the setting and all that a bit that I already locked myself into what I was going to show the players rather than consider what the players were looking for. Now, if your setting is as dynamic as I try to make mine, I'm not claiming I always hit that mark, but if you try and make sure that you always have different angles and different types of plot and different things that can happen in a given scenario, not necessarily combat-wise all the time. It could be political, it could be romantic interests, it could be just about anything you can throw at the board. Well, when your players come in, they start gravitating towards one thing, you're prepared for it. That's not what happened in this game. In this game, I had a few things that were foreshadowed, a few things that came around, but reality was when things really mattered, I ended up finding that I wasn't tying the players in, save for sheer survival. That's often my own personal plot hook. I enjoy games that kind of make you feel like, yeah, we survived this. You know, we deserve badges of honor because we're still freaking breathing, or, you know, we're still existing, depending on the game type. But then I realized I ended up listening to these characters and thinking back to what we did. And it was a lot of dungeon running and a lot of loose tie-ins and some stress, but, you know, some social interactions, but wasn't as strong as it needed to be. Never felt that way. The reason for this was really quite simple. This is lack of communication on my part with my players. I made the assumption I knew what they wanted rather than talking to them. And so by the time the game started, we were already locked on a collision course. Now, ironically, here's the irony. I had one player who came in to that game and he started hosting his own. And I ran in that game for almost a year and a half. Ironically, it literally dispersed when we were at the finish line for the arc he wanted to run. But I was playing Papa Sulj. And Papa, he was a clerical necromancer of sorts. Lawful good, believe it or not. A little bit of rule bending in order to make the theme, but he loved the theme of the character so much that he ran with it. And the thing is that when he loved that theme, when he was really in love with the theme, I could tell. I can tell because I noticed a lot of the plots were hitting points of my character that made him become introspective. What have I done? How have my decisions affected the world? How can I still consider myself at all good despite this dark power that I end up wielding? This, how close to the flame can I dance before I burn? I have to say, at that point, he astonished me. Absolutely astonished, because he made a game that I was heavily invested in. And I learned from him just how important that player feedback, how much the backgrounds matter, how much the character's theme matters. Because I missed it. Even with all my experience, I missed it. Then he played with that idea and then started rolling with it. And suddenly the character that I had was a part of the world. He wasn't interacting in the world, he was a part of it. And there were some moments of which we were having fun, riding the ribcage of a frost giant through the front lines to end up reaching a castle in order to save its defenders from the ensuing army, while everything ended up coming after us, and we're raining all kinds of death from its shoulders and ribcage, literally piloting like a skeletal mech. As weird as that was, that's one of those points that it was a kind of a feather in my cap, because it was a case of, okay, now we get to end up seeing what I can really do. There was points where I got to see characters develop. A half-orc witch that had to end up dealing with, well, quite frankly, being tormented by memories of his prison warden, for lack of a better term, and his torture. There was a gnome who loved battle, and full plate, and carrying a shield that was harder than iron, and protected those around her. It wasn't until later did we realize what her royal family history was and what exactly we were dealing with, to her shame, no less. And then her vengeance was sweet, if not a little disturbing. The point to take from this is talk with your players. Figure out what kind of game they want. Consider it almost like an experiment unto itself, that you are trying to figure out how to give these players the best experience you can give them for what they're hoping to realize. Don't let them dictate where the plot goes. Always end up tossing a wrench in it, throw a few curveballs, but give them the experience of it. And really, when you end up taking into note, there's one last thing that was not a mistake that all these games had in common. They made me a better ST. They made me a better GM. Made me a better flame tender. Because even after I realized I have overstepped my boundaries, or I've screwed up in some way that is going to harm the game, I didn't immediately stop those games. I ran them through. I ran them through to their natural conclusions. And I realized that there's one thing that you can end up taking from it. When everything's going all to hell, and plots aren't running the way you figured they would, the characters zig when you feel they should have zagged, they're instigating their allies and aligning themselves with the bad guy, all this kind of stuff. Experiment. The game will never be perfect. But if the game goes almost straight to hell on you for whatever reason, there's no reason to stop. That's every reason to explore. Experiment. I mean, the worst case scenario you're going to have is somebody's going to say, that game wasn't so great. You take your notes, you make your next one better. If the player was particularly a joy to have, maybe they even enjoyed your shenanigans, go with it. Absolutely go with it. When we end up making our worlds for players to inhabit, we can't help but get a little attached. This is our own world. We are the ones who designed it from the ground up. It exists only inside our head, inside our imaginations, inside of our ability to express and stimulate the imaginations. And because of that, they're your playground. And no problem stays a problem once you start to play around with this situation. So play. All of you brave STs, game masters, dungeon masters, flame tenders, or whatever you want to call yourself, play on.